Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Job Hunt Essentials. In today's video, we'll be talking about acing the coding interview. So, you've been you've got a coding interview round now, and now you have like maybe depending on the profile, it might be like 3 to 4 rounds of coding interviews, each having like 1 to 2 questions, right? And let's talk about like one round where you're given a problem and you think you know the solution. Now, the way you tackle a coding problem when you know a question is tells us a lot about like the depth of your technical knowledge when it comes to like software coding. There's one level who are just baby who think they know, but actually like as they talk deeper, they actually don't know the solution. These are folks who probably need a bit more like practice, and let's leave them aside for this round. And then there are kids who, the moment you give them a question and they think they know the solution, they just start diving in to start solving the problem. And then there are a bit more mature adults who take a systematic approach. They work through the solution and like make sure it's clean enough. And then there are these legends who really ace the interviews. There's literally nothing you can find fault in the way they solve a problem, and it's so clean and like and precise that it's almost the interview can actually go fight for like hiring this kind of a person. And in this video, we're going to be talking about how one can move from a person who just dives in knowing a solution to someone who can like put forth a very legendary performance when it comes to a coding interview. And again, the biggest assumption that we're making in this video is that given a coding problem, you already know the solution for that problem. So for those of you who are trying to learn how to solve, like we're going to be having a follow-up video. So let's save that for a side. So now, once you know the solution for a question, at least you have high level idea, I'd like to do what I call a legendary dance of a coding interview. This is a 4-step routine. So first, you start with clarifying, you're trying to clarify the questions, and then you're discussing the problem with the interviewer, like working with them on how you'd solve this problem. Like you're talking in plain, simple English here. And then you jump right in to implement it, like using coding best practices. And then finally, the most important part is to test out your solutions thoroughly to make sure it can meet the, the requirements of the coding problem that's been put forth. Now let's look at each of these steps more in detail. The first step is to clarify. A lot of times, coding questions that are given to you do have like pitfalls and ambiguities that are like intentionally left there for you to catch yourself. So before just diving in, like think through the problem. Make sure that the problem is clear end to end. Feel free to ask a lot of questions. And do this as early as possible, and don't wait to hit this as you go through the process. And that's not something that helps us understand like whether you have the big picture understanding or not. The next thing is, again, like sometimes there's going to be corner cases in a coding solution. See if you can catch these corner cases as early as possible, and like work with the interviewer to see how you'd want them to handle these corner cases. Talking about these things as early as possible ahead of time before going into the implementation tells us how strong of a control you have on the solution. Sometimes like some folks tend to wait till the implementation phase and like come back to asking these clarifying questions, and like and it actually sometimes like makes it harder for them to go back and redo their entire implementation. So I would actually make sure to think hard and catch all the pitfalls and corner cases as early as possible, asking a lot of clarifying questions ahead of time. And then the next thing is to discuss the solution with your interviewer. One thing is for you to know the solution, but it's also another thing to like work with the interviewer to walk them through your thought process. Tell them exactly step by step how you are planning to solve this problem. And this tells us how clearly you are able to communicate your technical solutions in mind. It's not very useful if you just have everything in hand and like work by yourself and then come back with a solution. It's important to work collaboratively in a technical environment. And this phase is very important and gives a signal about how good your communication skills are working in a collaborative technical environment. And then it's not, there's no one single clear answer in a lot of cases. As you go higher up the levels, there's a lot of trade-offs you'll have to make. And definitely, when you are making such trade-offs, make sure you call them out very explicitly. Work with the interviewer. See if they agree with the trade-offs you're making, or at least make sure that you are doing conscious trade-offs as you're working through a problem. This helps us understand your attention to detail and uh, your quality of system design thinking when it comes to solving coding problems. And then, of course, like there are different levels of solving a problem. Always shoot for the most optimal solution that you could think of. And this is another level where I would encourage you to iteratively work with your interviewer. Some folks may have the most optimal solution right out of the bat, and some may just have one naive solution and talk to the interviewer more and more to see what would be the agreeable level of optimization that you want to achieve as you move to the next step in your interview process. Again, I just want to reiterate here, it's not enough that if you just know the solution to the problem. It's important for you to communicate with the interviewer that this is a clear idea of how you're planning to solve this thing. Make sure you both are on the same page as you move into the implementation phase. This avoids a lot of confusion and misunderstanding between you and the interviewer as the interview progresses further. And then the interesting part when it comes to actually implementing a solution. This is where we are trying to see whether you can actually put the ideas you discussed in the previous phase into real life code. So here, we're looking for clean, good quality code. Like think about like how you do this in a production environment. Have very good variable naming, write good comments, and make sure your system is clean enough as if you're working on a production environment. Different languages have different best practices. There are like very strong data structures and like libraries and templates that are like useful in different languages. Make sure that the language you choose in an interview is something that you're very familiar with and you're familiar with its best practices, and try to adopt them as much as possible during this implementation phase. And again, make sure that you keep testing as a most important consideration as you're implementing the code. It's not very nice to just write one huge pack of code and like say, hey, I'm done. Think about how you can modularly like break down your code so that it makes it easy for us to test these components and make sure that your solution is reliable enough at different parts. One thing I would encourage is, like say if you're picking a language, let's say like C++ or Python or Java, Google has style guides for each of these languages. It's publicly available on GitHub. I would strongly encourage to like check them out and make yourself familiar with these best practices and style guides. Adopting to these things helps demonstrate a good control over the coding, engineering excellence, and product quality in you as an engineer. And finally, the testing phase. This is something that I notice a lot of engineers like skip during interviews. They want to like focus on like solving a problem and moving to the next thing, but the good testing is what distinguishes from an okay engineer to someone who really knows what he's doing with the code. And this starts with unit testing. Unit testing is not just about like giving an empty variable or a or say zero values. Think about like how you can do unit testing beyond just non-trivial cases. There are definitely systems that can go beyond just simple ones, and see if you can like think beyond that. Make sure you are testing your system for more than trivial use cases, and definitely write them down. And then also talk through how you would test the same thing in a large scale environment. A lot of times these coding questions might be of limited scope, that you would just have like a bunch of values given in and a bunch of values coming out. But think about like how a similar system would be tested if it's deployed in a larger scale environment. And then really good engineers also think about production quality testing. This could be like regression testing, stress testing, and like how would you like do something like an integration test if something of this nature would have to be deployed in a production environment with millions of customers like working on it. Again, all these things depend on the kind of question that's given to you. Sometimes it's not very obvious, But a person signaling that they're thinking of testing at these three different levels tells us the quality with which they plan to work uh, on coding projects that are assigned to them. Even if the problem scope is small, I would still encourage you to think about how you can see their problem at a larger scope and make sure that you are building solutions or at least talking through solutions that can be robust to challenges that come in as you scale up your systems. This definitely helps you position yourself as someone with a very strong technical depth. And some bonus tips that I found useful during interview process. Sometimes the question might not be very clear, and a lot of times folks tend to get stressed that they are not making enough progress, that they will sometimes quickly start diving into solving the problem to see, okay, I'll figure out as I go through. A lot of times taking the time to think through and solving the problem, working with this interviewer and trying to solve the problem, uh, having building a better clarity would make a huge difference, because then you might be able to solve it within the, let's say, in a 45-minute round. You might even take 15 to 20 minutes finding out, crystallizing a solution, and the remaining 25 minutes might be more than enough for you to implement and test it out. So it's okay if you don't have your answer right off the bat within the first 5 minutes of giving you the interview question. And me as an interviewer, I highly I highly appreciate people who look for thoroughness and good quality engineering in their solutions. And this definitely helps me identify folks who stand apart from folks who, of course, know the solutions, which would be a much bigger pool of candidates. This is another mostly a interview level tip. Uh, no matter how much you have practiced coding, and no matter how thorough you are, there is always some level of coding fatigue, especially when you're working with you interviewing for big companies. They tend to have several rounds of coding, and recruiters tend to pack them all into a single day. And sometimes as you go throughout the day, the last few rounds might be too much of a fatigue that you might just zone out for a few minutes, and that actually might cost you an interview and your entire job. So I prefer to break my interviews to multiple days, at least 2 days, so that you can you have enough energy to put into these coding problems. And also, this is not just about giving a question and solving it yourself, but it needs to be sometimes a very collaborative thing. Watch for interviewer cues. See how they're responding to the solutions you have. Is it convincing them? Are they on the same page with the direction you're taking? And working together, building that collaborative environment, picking cues if they are showing you some, might be very helpful in making sure you put forth a very strong coding interview performance. I hope you found this video useful. In the next video, we'll be talking about how you can start with the most fundamental thing, how do you even know how to solve a problem when given a question. And again, that's of course the first step, but I'll be diving more into that in my next video. I hope you found this video useful. Looking forward to catching you up in the next video. Thank you.